So, a business divorce is a term we use when we're talking about when a business owner is in the middle of a divorce. So, business divorce can sound like two business partners are breaking up, but that's not what we mean. What we really mean is that one of the two spouses who are in the process of getting unmarried, one of them, or heck, maybe both, one or both of them owns a business. And when that happens, there are a whole host of other things that are part of the divorce that people really need to think about strategically, because the last thing that we want to do is cause any harm to a business that's providing a substantial chunk of the livelihood of the people who are breaking up. So we have to be really strategic about how we uncouple the couple and make sure that we take care of the business. There are a few things that are fairly common scenarios. One of them is you have two spouses working in the business. So we're trying to think out about the practical considerations of whether or not these are two folks who are going to be able to continue working together in the future. It happens, I swear. That does happen. But more commonly, it doesn't make sense for both of them to continue working in the business. So how do you make that fair? How do you make sure that the business is going to be successful going forward and is appropriately staffed and run the way it needs to be, but also that the spouse who's potentially exiting the business is compensated for their share in it? So that's one scenario where there are two spouses both working in the business. Sometimes only one spouse is involved in a business that's part of a divorce, but sometimes that spouse's role in the business, there are a lot of family assets tied up in the business. For example, perhaps the cars are owned by the business and leased out. So there can be a lot more to untangle financially, even when only one spouse is involved in running a business. So a lot of times what happens when you've got a business involved in your divorce because one or both spouses is an owner or maybe also working in it, one issue that comes up when there's a business involved in a divorce, when one or both of the spouses owns it, when one or both of the spouses works in it, is how do you value it? How do you know how much that's worth? You can see why this is complicated, right? Because if I go check my 401k balance, it'll just give me a number. I know exactly what that asset's worth. If you think about your house, well, you kind of have a sense of how to get the value of that, right? Probably hire an appraiser and get an appraisal. Or, well, heck, you sell your house and then you know exactly what its value was, right? With a business, if you're planning on selling it in the course of the divorce, which is very uncommon actually, but you could sell it and then you would know literally how much a willing buyer was willing to pay. But in most cases, one or both of the spouses is keeping the asset, the business asset going forward. So the question is, how do we value this business so that we can compensate the spouse who's not going to be an owner anymore for the value of that business? And the answer is typically a business valuation, not a tricky name, right? Pretty literal. So we hire a business valuator. That person usually values a lot of businesses. This is something that they do. They're typically very familiar with the divorce context. They know that they aren't literally going to be selling the business, that this is just really about placing a value on it for purposes of the dissolution of marriage process. And they are a CPA, an experienced CPA accountant who does this work. And then we get a value. Now, two things can happen here. In some divorces, both spouses are working together well enough so that they agree to jointly retain the business valuator. In other words, if I'm spouse one's lawyer and we have someone down the street who's spouse two's lawyer, we would call each other and say, do you want to hire an appraiser for this business together? The spouses would agree on the appraiser after consulting with their divorce counsel, and they would hire someone. And then they would agree that whatever that person says, that's going to be the value. That's what they're going to go with. Sort of the best case scenario, because business valuations are expensive. And generally, the less acrimony we have over things like this, the better. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes we get dueling experts. So spouse one hires a person to do the business valuation and they come up with a number. And then spouse two hires someone to come up with the business valuation and they come up with a number. And then if we can't meet in the middle and negotiate it, we might wind up in front of a judge with those experts testifying and a judge deciding what the actual value of the business is. If that sounds expensive and time consuming, you are correct. That is expensive and time consuming. But sometimes the numbers are just so far apart or one's so off the charts from something that you could live with. That's the road that makes the most sense for you. Once you've valued the business and you've agreed upon, hopefully, you've agreed upon a value of the business, the next question is, okay, but how do we divide it? I mean, there are so many options here. I'm not going to list all of them because this is a time where experienced lawyers can get really creative on how to structure this. But thinking big, sometimes it makes sense for both spouses to keep being partners in the business. In that case, the value doesn't even really matter that much because they're both going to keep owning the business. But when we valued the business, that often means that one spouse either isn't actively involved in it or is and wants to transition out of it. So we want to find a way to compensate them for their, I hesitate to say share of the business, because in Connecticut, both spouses, all of the property that's in a marriage, regardless of how it's titled, regardless of how it's owned, can be divided by the court because we do an equitable division strategy. Both people in the marriage might not even own any shares of the business, but it's still a marital asset that the court's going to look at how it should divide. So maybe one spouse takes more of the 401k money in exchange for the other spouse keeping more of the business. Maybe one spouse keeps the vacation home. Maybe one spouse keeps the marital home. And what I'm getting at is maybe there's other property or other assets that we can exchange for the business. One of the things that we've also done is have alimony sort of compensate a spouse for the business. If it would harm the business to have an outflow of cash from the business, one way is to compensate the spouse exiting the marriage and exiting the business in the form of something that looks more like alimony, a monthly payment, a weekly payment, or something like that. So again, the circumstances of your life, your spouse's life, and what kind of business you have, how it's run, if it's cash rich or cash poor, all of those things will go into the structure we come up with to have you exit the other side of your divorce with the assets that you need in order to live the life that you want to be living. So people who own small businesses, sometimes they offer professional services like a law firm, like an accountant firm, like an engineering firm. Though those businesses can have physical assets and intellectual assets. Other times it's more of a bricks and mortar thing. The business is in manufacturing. It makes a thing that it sells, a physical, tangible thing. Sometimes there are partners in that business outside the marriage. So there are folks that we need to consider that aren't getting divorced. And there's an impact. The divorce impacts how those partners' futures in the business look too. So this is really a holistic approach to how to structure the division of a business in a way that doesn't kill the golden goose. We want that business to be able to thrive, but there are a lot of factors that we have to deal with. Many people come in with buy-sell arrangements with their partners and things like that. Some business operating agreements anticipate a divorce so that everyone knows what happens should any of the partners have a marriage that ends. There are prenuptial agreements that contemplate divorces. By the way, this is a very good idea. If you're a business owner, before you get married, it's a very good idea to have a prenup that pre-decides how things are going to work with the business. If you are considering a second marriage and are a business owner and you've gone through a divorce with a business involved, you already know this. I don't have to tell you. You're definitely doing a prenup the other time. So we can all take a lesson from the folks that have learned the lesson the hard way. But there are a lot of different ways to structure your business to try and pre-decide how this will work so that there's more clarity for both spouses and for all of the other business partners if there are any. If you have a business and you're considering divorce, or if you have a business and you're considering marrying, please call us before you make any moves. At Freed Marcroft, we do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and other business owners. This is a planning process. The more time we have to get a plan in place and to really understand you and your business and your goals for the future, the better and smoother we can make things go for you.